And welcome to the Rob Call Bottom Up Radio Show, WNJC 1360 AM out of Washington Township, reaching Metro Philly and South Jersey. And online, you can get it at iTunes, looking for my name, Rob Call, K-A-L-L, or at opednews.com/podcasts. And the show is sponsored by opednews.com. My guest tonight, coming back for the third or fourth or fifth time, is Paul Craig Roberts. He's had careers in scholarship and academia, including Stanford and Georgetown universities. He served in the congressional staff and as an assistant secretary of the Treasury. He's been a columnist for the Washington Times, the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, Scripps Howard News Service, and Creators Syndicate. His latest book is How America Was Lost, From 9/11 to the Police Welfare State. Welcome back, Paul.
Thanks, Rob.
So, I've got a whole long list of topics and questions I want to ask you. I wanted to start with Russia, the neocons, Europe, and the dollar. Throw them all in there, and you can do what you want with it.
Oh, you mean you're just giving me a carte blanche to respond to those topics?
Well, you know, I mean, I'm throwing them all together because there's word that Putin is taking serious action to get rid of the dollar as a means for exchange for energy, and Russia is one of the biggest suppliers of energy now. We know that the neocons were very involved in setting off what's been going on in the Ukraine, and you've written about how Europe is ready to get totally screwed by the U.S. because they're acting as a puppy dog, a lapdog to Obama. So I'm just kind of setting you up so you can launch. Okay, well, here goes the launch.
Russia is looked at with a jaundiced eye by Washington because of the Brzezinski doctrine and the Wolfowitz doctrine. You know, Brzezinski was the national security advisor for Jimmy Carter, who ended up funding the bin Laden in Afghanistan in order to help the Afghans drive the Soviets out of that country. And Wolfowitz has had a number of Pentagon appointments, including the second man in the Pentagon, the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Now, the Brezhnev...
An IMF, isn't he, or was he?
He was appointed the president of the IMF, but there was a scandal about he put his live-in girlfriend on at some huge salary. And there was a scandal about it.
You know, I hadn't thought about it, but really, you know, if you're going to get somebody like him who wants to screw the world monetarily, might as well, it's not surprising to see that he's getting someone who he's screwing to help him to screw the rest of the world.
Yeah. So he didn't last long in that job, but his doctrine is very long-lived, and it's a very dangerous one. Well, I'm going to tell you. First, I'll tell you about Brzezinski, because he came first. And Brzezinski, his view, once the Soviet Union collapsed, was that the United States should prevent any reconstitution of Russia that would give it the same sort of power that the Soviet Union had. Because at the moment, with the collapse in the Soviet Union, there was no barrier to America exercising its will over the world, that the United States could call all the shots, and so the world would be better off if we were calling the shots than if there were some shots we couldn't call because there were other global powers. And so Brzezinski said that one way to prevent Russia from becoming, gathering itself up again in a new format, being a powerful state, was for the United States to control the Eurasian landmass. And, of course, this whole thing was used by later Washington regimes to break all the agreements that Reagan had made with Gorbachev to take NATO right up to Russia's border by putting Eastern Europe, the Baltics into it, and then later by expanding Washington's control even into former constituent parts of Russia herself, like Georgia, the birthplace of Joseph Stalin, and Ukraine, which had been part of Russia for centuries. So the notion was that the Russian Federation would be busted up into smaller pieces, sort of semi-autonomous, and that this would prevent Russia from controlling enough peoples and landmass and resources to be able to block any American initiatives or actions. So that's Brzezinski. Now, Wolfowitz went further and said that the United States had to prevent the rise of any other country, that includes China, that could in any way interfere with American hegemony over the world. That this is the neocon doctrine that we are the indispensable country, the exceptional people, that everyone else is dispensable and unexceptionable. In other words, it's really an assertion of the Nazi doctrine. I know you don't like that word, but the Germans were...
No, that word's fine. Some people overuse it. But how is an assertion...
Well,
how
the
is
German,
the neocon
German
doctrine an assertion of the Nazi doctrine?
The German doctrine was that the Germans were the Übermenschen, the superior men, the above men, the upper men, and most of the rest of humanity, with a few exceptions like the British, were Untermensch, and that means the undermen, the inferiors. And so it was a claim the Germans had of Aryan superiority, and the neoconservative claim is that we are the exceptional and indispensable people, and that gives us priority over the rest of the world, and that's the reason that we have chosen, we have been chosen by history to prevail over the world. So if you are chosen by history to prevail, then whatever you do to prevent the rise of other countries is legitimate. And that's the way the U.S. government has seen it since the second Clinton term, through the George Bush terms, through the Obama terms, that whatever we do to maintain and extend our hegemony has already been approved by history. Because the Soviet collapse proved it. You see, this is not me. It's what they say. You can read it in the documents. I'm not saying that.
Okay. All right. But let me ask you this.
Yeah.
You know, I was going to talk to you about American exceptionalism anyway, and this seems like a good place to introduce that idea. Don't most nations have a form of exceptionalism? And how bad is, or how would you assess American exceptionalism? And where that fits in with this idea of neocons having this Nazi mindset?
Well, I don't think anyone has ever claimed it. The Germans, the neocons, and I think for a short period of time the Japanese had that idea that they were, the rising sun. But these are not worldwide or normal types of thinking. I don't think I don't think Canada's ever had it, or Australia, or Brazil, or any country. Now the British had an empire, but and all the Europeans who had empires saw themselves as superior to the colonies, to the people in the colonies, but they didn't actually think they were superior to other empires or other European peoples. I don't know of any claim the British ever made that they were chosen by history to prevail over the world, or the French or having made any such claim.
Now, when the neocons make that claim, do they cite some source or some religious aspects or entities? How do they claim?
Well, are you familiar with the book, The End of History? That, what was his name? He wrote that. That was one of the first expressions, public expressions of it, and it's sort of historical based. I hate to use these kinds of analogies because I don't know how correct they are, but you mean, Marx sort of said that history had chosen the proletariat, and that the proletariat was chosen by history over the capitalists. So there'd been that type of thing, and end of history, basically what it meant was that the collapse of the Soviet Union proved there was no other social economic system that was viable except American capitalism, and so we had been chosen by history as the only path, and this was the way he expressed this neocon idea. And the neocons have turned it into a military formulation with the Wolfowitz Doctrine. This is publicly available. You can go Google it, and it'll come up, the Wolfowitz Doctrine. It's an official American. In fact, it is the doctrine that determines our foreign policy and has determined it since Clinton attacked Serbia. So it really is just a claim that since we are the one, that whatever we do to prevent the rise of others who might interfere with this exceptional, indispensable role that we have, we are to prevent it. And that's what the Wolfowitz Doctrine asserts. I quote from it in some recent columns, and it's very revealing. And it essentially tells Russia and China that, no, you can't rise to any extent that you would get in our way. And so that's the reason for Ukraine. Ukraine, long part of Russia. It was separated when the Soviet Union collapsed. Largely, this was Washington's doing. That Washington, if not instigated, supported and made possible the separation of Ukraine from Russia. It had been part of Russia for centuries. Much of the Ukraine is former Russian territories that were added to the Ukraine by Communist Party leaders. For example, Crimea was added by Khrushchev in 1954. Khrushchev was a Ukrainian. He was known as the butcher of the Ukraine, and I think to make amends for all the people he had slaughtered, he gave Crimea to the Ukraine. But it didn't make any difference because Ukraine and Russia were simply constituent parts of the Soviet Union. It was still the same country, the same passport. And Lenin had put the parts of the Ukraine that are now trying to separate, the east and southern parts, Lenin had added those to the Ukraine. And I think this was, these were largely administrative reasons because of how the location of these territories were. So the whole point of the coup that Washington organized in Ukraine, it used its NGOs that it had financed with $5 billion over the last 10 years, just as Victoria Nuland said in her December speech in Washington. Used that to groom politicians who would serve Washington, to create organizations among students and others, always hidden under the guise of teaching democracy or human rights or women's rights or education. But these are all essentially Washington fifth columns that they can put into operation behind a cause.
Wait a second, you just said these are essentially Washington fifth columns?
Yeah, that Washington organizes in other countries. they used them in Georgia. When you see the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2004, they had a revolution, but it failed to deliver the country. So Washington redoubled its efforts and dumped another $5 billion over the next 10 years into the Ukraine, and then pulled off the coup against the elected government last fall and stuck in their guys. And they pulled off a similar revolution in Georgia. They tried it in Iran with the Green Revolution. It didn't work. And you have to have people on the ground, and these are the people recruited by the NGOs and the money. And a lot of the people are sincere and think they're actually fighting for women's rights or human rights, and don't realize how they're being used. But so when the president in Ukraine turned down the offer to join the EU, Washington put these NGOs into the streets. And of course, once that started, the right-wing elements took over the protests, introduced violence. And the mixture, I don't know if Washington was aware of these right-wing elements or was relying on them. I don't know. We've not ever been able to figure that out. But the result was a democratically elected government was overthrown by a coup. Now, this is not a good precedent for having democracy, because elections were coming up in a few months. And when you overthrow a new democracy, I mean, Ukraine had been a democracy for, 20 years, and it was having its troubles because of the various oligarchs and because of the differences within the Ukrainian population, because so much of it is not Ukrainian, it's Russian, and even a few Tartars. So when Washington overthrew that government, it sort of created the precedent. Well, look, we don't have to change things to the ballot box. We just do it in the streets. So that's a big setback for Ukrainian democracy. I don't know that it will ever recover. It might. But when something like that happens so early in a transition, it's a bad precedent. So that's where that came from. So what does Washington want to do with the Ukraine? Well, mainly they want to bring all kinds of problems to Russia that will distract Russia from Washington's dealings in Syria and Iran. So if Russia's got troubles in its backyard, it's a former part of Russia itself. You know, a lot of these Ukrainians have got, they're intermarried. They've got Russian relatives. Russians have Ukrainian relatives. They were part of the same country for centuries. So it's a terrible situation for Russia, because any Russian has a right to Russian citizenship. So, and if you've got a whole bunch of former Russian provinces saying we want to rejoin Russia, and the Russian government says no, then the Russian government loses support at home with its own people. You're not sticking up for Russians. If Russia says, okay, you can join, like they did to the Crimeans, then the United States says, oh, they invaded and stole the country, stole Crimea. They're going to invade and steal the eastern provinces. So the Russian government is kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't, because Washington is using this crisis to bust up the economic relationships between Europeans and Russians, because Washington is concerned that the European dependence on Russian energy, which is dramatic. For example, German industry would be shut down without it. And the growing economic relationships between German and French companies with Russia, they're now extensive. that Washington would lose its hold over its NATO puppet states. So it's trying to break up those relationships by demonizing Russia, by creating the notion that Russia is a great threat to Europe. We have to build up all the bases along Eastern European Russian border, sending planes to Poland, troops to the Baltics, conducting war games continually, as we're doing right now, on Russia's borders. And this makes it hard for the European leaders to tell Washington, look, we have a lot of interest in the dealings with Russia. We don't want to be part of your controversy with Russia. It's too much at risk for us. So they, in other words, the demonization of Russia is used to make the European leaders accept the American delivery of a major strategic threat to Russia in the Ukraine.
But that demonization is not really working very well, is it?
Well, it is, actually. It is and it isn't. It is and it isn't. The southern and eastern Ukraine, they're in revolt. Several of these territories have already voted their independence and have asked Russia to please reunite them with a mother country, because that's what they are. They're part of Russia. And Putin hasn't done it. And so inside Russia now, he's coming under criticism from the nationalists, the people who are particularly nationalistic, that he's not supporting the Russians. And it's not doing him any good on the propaganda front, because Washington keeps lying through its teeth. And they keep saying he's got troops on the border, he's supporting the revolts in the breakaway provinces, it's all Russia's fault, it's Russia's fault, it's all he hears. And so by not acting, by not accepting them, he's not avoiding being demonized, just as demonized as if he simply said, okay, they're part of Russia again. Now, if the Ukrainian right-wing militias keep attacking them, they're attacking Russia, and we're going to wipe them out. So he's losing both ways. He's losing at home because he doesn't support them, and he's losing internationally because the fact that he doesn't support them is kept out of the news by the Washington propaganda that he's the cause of the whole problem. So it is working for Washington. Now, on the other hand, the way it's not working, you have the Europeans, not so much the leaders, who I think are just simply bought off with money, but the business interest in Germany. They're very much opposed to this worsening of relations with Russia because there's 6,000 German firms making profits doing business in Russia. There are 300,000 German workers whose jobs are directly related to trade with Russia, and of course they are desperately dependent on the energy sources from Russia that at the moment have to go through Ukraine and can be disrupted by the Ukrainians simply on Washington's orders. So they're not happy about that. The French are not happy. They've agreed to provide Russia with 2 aircraft carriers. Well, of course, Washington's gone berserk and is trying to block this, and the trouble for the French, of course, is employment. And what happens to the profits of the companies involved in this and to the workers? And so Washington is meeting opposition from the business interests in Europe. And it looks like so far in France, Hollande is a bit more responsive to the French business interests than he is to Washington, but in Germany, Merkel so far is more responsive to Washington than she is to the German business interests. So how this plays out remains to be seen, but you can see how complex the picture is, and you can see how Putin is trying to be very reasonable, very unthreatening, very reassuring, hoping that Europe will break away, or one or two of the main countries like Germany or France will break away from the American grip and refuse to participate in Washington's scheme, in which case Putin would come out the winner. And it's a gamble, because if he doesn't come out the winner on that, he's already the loser at home, because he's not supporting Russians. He's letting essentially right-wing militias murder civilians who are protesting. And that is costing him. So that's the situation.
Now, there's also the discussion of Putin working to change from using the dollar to using the euro and Chinese currency to pay for energy.
Right. Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yes. Okay. Let's talk about that, because that's very important. Since World War II, the U.S. dollar has been the world reserve currency. That means it performs the function that gold used to perform. It is the reserves of central banks. And dollars then back the paper currencies of other countries, the way that gold used to back them. And when this was first set up, the dollars held by foreign central banks were convertible into gold. But when the French tried to do that, Nixon broke that connection, and he did what's called, he took the dollar off the convertibility to gold that was the original backing under the Bretton Woods system. So the dollar no longer, a foreign central bank who held dollars could no longer convert them to gold. But the dollar remained the reserves. And what that means is that any bill anywhere in the world can be paid in dollars. And the way the payment system is set up, all bills are paid in dollars, or most of them. So if Germany buys something from Japan, it doesn't pay in euros, it changes euros to dollars, it pays Japan in dollars. If Japan wants yen, it has to go back into the foreign exchange market and exchange the dollars for yen. So each country has a commission they have to pay in the currency transaction. And the dollar remains the payment mechanism. So this means Washington can always pay its own bills by printing money. It can simply, if it can't pay its bills or it has a huge deficit, it can just create dollars and pay them, because they are seen as world reserves. They're like gold. Okay, we'll be glad to have.
And that's an advantage. That's an advantage that only the U.S. has, because it has the currency
that's
that everybody exchanges.
That's right. That's the advantage, and it's the basis of American power. Without that, the United States would be far, far less powerful. It's not a military-based power. It's the financial hegemony that the world reserve, that being the world reserve currency gives you. Now, what's happened? In recent years, people have seen that the United States has been creating dollars hand over fist, but not goods and services to match. And so the dollar is being diluted, and the holders of vast amounts of dollars around the world are saying, what are these dollars going to be worth? Look, they're printing a new $1 trillion every year, part of quantitative easing. They've diluted our holdings already by $4 trillion. Shouldn't we think about doing something else? And so the BRICS, Brazil, India, China, Russia, South Africa, formed up and said, we're going to work it out such that we do our trade with one another in our own currencies. And already there have been bilateral agreements. Australia and China now trade in their own currencies. And China and Japan made a deal. Now, we may have queered that second deal there, and because of Japan kind of does what we want, but the deal was made. So this was already starting, but now when Washington starts threatening Russia with sanctions, with real sanctions, they haven't had any real ones yet. These are make-believe so far. But real ones would essentially exclude them from the payment system. And so Russia says, well, we don't need this. We don't even need to be in that payment system. In fact, I don't even know what we're doing in that system, Putin says, because it just gives Washington power over us. Why should we give them power over us when they're trying to do us harm? And so we're going to leave the system. And so they did it in a dramatic way in that energy deal with China. It's the biggest energy deal in the history of the world, and the dollar plays no role in it whatsoever. So the supposition is that this now will, what was largely talk and plans, has now been launched, and it will move forward, and other countries will get in on it. And as the use of the dollar declines, the demand for dollar in exchange markets, foreign exchange markets, will decline, and therefore the exchange value of the dollar to other currencies will decline, and Washington then will have a major problem of inflation, because if your currency drops in exchange value, all your imports rise in price, and the American people are already hard-pressed. And if they find all of a sudden there's a huge jump in the prices of all the imported goods, we're now heavily an import-dependent country. We owe this to jobs offshoring, or free trade, as it's called sometimes. So that shows that the hubris and arrogance in Washington, determined to inflict damage on Russia, did not realize that the real damage is going to be on Washington. Because then you drive a major country, or now two major countries. In fact, the BRICS, the 5 countries that make up the BRICS, account for 1/2 of the world's total population. So they're removed from the dollar payment system. Who's hurt? Washington. It's a crushing blow that idiot in the White House has brought on the country by threatening Russia with sanctions. So that shows how smart people are in Washington. It shows how hubris and arrogance destroys the ability to think.
All right, now I want to continue. I need to do a station ID. This is the Rob Call Bottom Up Radio Show, WNJC 1360 AM, reaching Metro Philly and South Jersey, sponsored by opednews.com. If you've jumped in the middle of this conversation, you can go to opednews.com/podcast or to iTunes, and by late tonight, the full interview will be up and downloadable for free. So, Paul, we've been talking about what's going on with Russia and Ukraine and the Russian and the BRICS efforts to shift the currency of the world from the dollar to other things. And you've just talked about how stupid they are in Washington. To me, saying they're stupid is cutting them slack. Saying they're stupid or they make mistakes or it's the other guy's fault. I really believe that they're doing what they want to do. Is it stupid if they're doing what they want to do and their intention is to do that? And, the question is, who are they serving and why are they doing it? Because do you really think they're stupid?
Yes, I think they're stupid because if you drive the world away from your currency as the world reserve currency, you've simply decimated your own power.
But who benefits from that? Qui bono?
Well, Washington doesn't, and Washington is the one that's threatening the sanctions.
Then who does benefit?
Huh? Sorry?
Who does benefit?
The rest of the world. because they get out from under American financial control. And of course, if the dollar goes as reserve currency, there also goes the IMF. And the IMF is the main instrument that the Western bankers use to loot other countries. So, they're going to loot the Ukraine. The IMF deal is already set. Ukraine will be bled dry. But if the dollar goes, the IMF goes, the World Bank goes. All the looting mechanisms that the West has used historically to steal the resources and impose poverty in other countries, they're gone with the dollar.
But wait, because I don't want to give up on this. It seems to me, things happen in Washington for a reason. If they're giving it up, then
they don't know they're giving it up. They thought, we're so powerful, we're so arrogant. It was just like Hitler marching off into the Soviet Union. It was about the stupidest thing anybody could have done. It destroyed him. If he hadn't done that, Germany would be ruling all of Europe, England, North Africa, the Middle East.
Yeah. Well, I think that Obama does what he's told. I mean, so the neocons think this. The neocons, as you said, are like the Nazis in their hubris. But corporations have a huge influence on Washington. How do they stand to fare in terms of this change from the dollar to the euro or the renminbi or whatever?
They lose their financial hegemony, and they lose the power to loot. So the reason this is a mistake, a stupid mistake, is that it was done just to assert power. And they didn't think about the unintended consequences of threatening Russia with sanctions, because it didn't occur to them that Russia doesn't need to be in the dollar system at all. It's energy independent. It's vast. It sits over Eurasia. It borders China. And all that Obama and the neocons have done is to force a strategic alliance between Russia and China. So when you do something like that, you're stupid. And that's why I said they're stupid. They're not doing it because some vested interest somewhere, the Bilderbergers or the Trilateral Commission, is going to get rich out of this scheme. They're not.
So how will this change the world? How will this revise the balances?
Here's what will happen. You see, after World War II, it made perfect sense for the dollar to be world reserves. Not only was it convertible into gold for foreign central banks, but every other country was destroyed. The United States was the only industrial manufacturing country that was intact. Japan was destroyed, Germany, Russia, England, Italy. China was a third world country. Most of the rest of the countries were third world countries. Well, since that time, we've got many viable economies. China now has greater manufacturing industrial capacity than the United States. Russia is a powerful manufacturing industrial first world economic capabilities. Just look at their military. Stands up to it can stand up to ours. Anything we got, they got or better. So you have so many countries now that they can trade with each other in their own currencies. There won't be a reserve currency. There simply won't be one. And the BRICS say they're going to start up their own IMF. So what it means is that the United States, which has had financial hegemony for 60, 70 years. In fact, it started right after World War I because the British were so weakened. the pound continued as a reserve currency, but the dollar was making inroads. So it's almost been going for 100 years. But
it seems almost
strongly
like
for 60. Now, if you lose that, you've lost your ability to control financial movements, financial flows. Your banks are no more important than any other country's banks. Your central bank, your Federal Reserve, can no longer call the monetary policy in the world. It can't call up the Japanese and say, we want you to go print some yen to buy the dollar because the dollar's under pressure. They can't call up the European Central Bank and say, we want you to print euros and go buy the dollar because the dollar's under pressure, because nobody will care. So it basically decapitates American power. So, and why did they do this? Oh, we're going to force the Russians to do what we want. We're going to use coercion, threats. And Putin said, stick them up your butt. So
it seems like this is probably something that's inevitable. It's going to happen sooner or later because all these other countries are becoming independently, economically viable. And the BRICS are creating a world of their own. So whether Obama did this or it happened later, it seems like this is something that is going to happen.
That's right. It would have eventually happened anyhow, but only because Washington was abusing it. If Washington had sense and said, look, we've got a good thing going, let's keep everybody part of it. Let's don't go around making threats, cutting people out, throwing sanctions on them because we don't like them. All of that is strictly illegal under international law. It's just an exercise of brute power. So it's like the policeman who abuses his badge, abuses his authority because he likes to exercise power. So if Washington had not done that, if it had used this in a responsible manner, it could have kept it forever because people were used to it. There wasn't any reason to get out of it. But when you use it to bully people and to prevail over them, then they're going to eventually get out of it. So that's where it went wrong.
Okay, so I'm going to transition from this to a topic that I've been covering a lot in the last year, and that's psychopaths and sociopaths. And I'm transitioning to it because you're talking about bullying. And really what you're talking about is neocons who are engaging in a kind of narcissistic domination where they think they're better than everybody else, and they're engaging in aggressive predatory behaviors. That sure seems to me to look like psychopathic, sociopathic kinds of behaviors.
You're absolutely correct. Yeah, I completely agree with what you've been writing. It's true. It's a look, anytime you take a doctrine like that, that's who you attract. I mean, that's who the Nazis attracted, the sociopaths, psychopaths, because we are superior. We're superior, and all these other people are inferior, and we can just walk right over them. So anytime you have, and the same thing happens with this power. Bullies go to wherever there's power, because power usually is not very accountable. So a guy with a police badge is essentially not very accountable. He's not like you or I. You can see this, for example. Look at the Cicely McMillan case. You know, the Occupy protester whose breasts were seized by the cop, bruised, and she's thrown to the ground. But when her breasts are seized, just reflexively and instinctively, her elbow comes up as she swings around to see what's going on, and the elbow hits the cop. So she's arrested for assaulting a police officer. She was recently sentenced to prison.
Right.
Well, this is an example of the policeman is unaccountable. He assaults a young woman. He abuses his authority. He abuses his power. she's thrown to the ground, and then she's arrested on a false charge, and the false testimony, and she's convicted on false testimony, and she's in prison. Now, the real perpetrator is back on the streets to do it again. In the trial, the judge refused for the defense to present any evidence in behalf of the defendant. For example, the cop responsible has a long record of violence against the public, of abuse of authority, of suspensions, and the judge says you can't present that. The judge would not let them present photographs of the mangled and bruised breasts. So there was nothing that the judge permitted in behalf of the young woman, but the cop's lies were permitted. But they couldn't be challenged because the judge wouldn't allow it, and so off goes the innocent to jail and the cop's back on the street. Now, when you have power like that, you're going to get psychopaths and sociopaths joining the police. They flock to power. This is trouble with any kind of power. It attracts people who want to use it and who get thrills from using it, no matter what it does to other people. And so that's why the neocons are all for war. They have no remorse. If you look at the 21st century, Rob, what has the United States done? It's slaughtered by murder. It's maimed. It's displaced millions of people in 7 countries. I've not heard one word of remorse from any public figure, from any general, from the New York Times, from the Washington Post, from anybody except a few internet writers. So that's the whole problem with power, and I agree totally with you. We have a nation run by sociopaths and psychopaths.
So what do we do about it?
You know, it doesn't look like you can do anything about it. The only real opportunity is third party. We saw recently in Europe what are said to be right-wing, anti-immigrant parties. They prevailed in the EU elections. They got the most votes in France and England. Of course, they're being demonized in the Western press as racist or something, but what it really is about, everybody has given up on the EU. They're sick to death of it. They're tired of the Americans dominating their life, and so they voted for the only alternative, which was a third party. Now, we saw something like this happen the other day when Eric Cantor got defeated in Virginia. Now, this is really stunning. They didn't even bother to put on a campaign because this is the Israel lobby's favorite guy. I mean, who's ever heard of an Israel lobby candidate going down to defeat? It's never happened in American history. And he gets beat by some college professor running on a $50,000 budget. So it can be at some point people finally realize, voting Democrat, voting Republican, it doesn't lead anywhere. Just like the British finally realized, hey, voting Labor or voting Tory, it doesn't lead anywhere. Or just like the French realized, hey, voting Socialist or voting Conservative doesn't go anywhere. And so let's vote for somebody else. So that's one way. Now the question is, though, whether these parties will be tolerated, whether the leaders will be assassinated, physically assassinated, or will they be assassinated in the press, like Dominic Strauss-Kahn was. You just start a campaign against them because the establishment controls the press, not the third party. So there's no real guarantee that the people, even when they vote third party, can succeed in replacing the government because the power structure arrayed against these third parties is just overwhelming. They can be destroyed in the press. Any intelligence service can assassinate them. They're unaccountable. Nobody would ever be able to do anything about it, even if you had a movie of it happening. It'd simply be seized and declared to be national security secret. So it's not clear anything can be done. That's why it's so often the case. Once things start going bad, Rob, they end up in collapse. And what changes the thing is collapse.
What does that look like?
Well, in the United States, it would look pretty bad. It would be massive economic disruption, food shortages, breakdown in all public services, employment would cease, transportation disrupted, food deliveries disrupted, riots, all this well-armed paramilitary force that the United States has now created. You know, we've got the Education Department with guns and ammunition, the Post Office, the Social Security Administration, the Agriculture Department. All these people have bought huge numbers of hollow point bullets, submachine guns. We've got the local police with tanks and armored personnel carriers and all kinds of military equipment, including helicopters and night vision, and you would just and you have a well-armed population. It'd just be chaos and death and destruction and people starving to death, particularly if the dollar collapses, because it then wouldn't, you know, right now people don't have, other than the mega rich, they don't have any slack in their budget. They can barely get their housing paid, their food paid, their gasoline bills paid, the utilities paid. And all of a sudden your prices go up. What would they do? What would happen to Americans if the gasoline price goes from $4 a gallon to $8 to 10 to 12? They can't, even if they had jobs, they can't commute. So the whole thing is dangerous. And this is why I think, this is why I speak out, because it's irresponsible for a government to assume it's all powerful now and forever, that nothing can ever go wrong against it, that it will always prevail, that and it can smash up its own people as much as it wants because they don't have any alternative. But it will never get so bad that they can't get by. As long as they can get by, they'll accept what the government does. So if you have that kind of attitude, you're not aware of unintended consequences. You're not aware of how things can blow up in your face, and you can bring down the whole society just from trying to exercise power.
Where will corporations be if this kind of thing happens to the U.S., if the dollar is no longer the currency? I mean, corporations are transnational now. They have most of their money in overseas banks and some corporations are anticipating this, planning for it, or maybe even helping to make it happen?
Well, if they're American corporations, they're subject to American laws, and if they're earning profits abroad, they're paying foreign taxes, and they can get a credit for that in the U.S., but they're still subject to taxes. And if America goes down the tubes, they will too. I mean, the Chinese don't need them now. The Chinese have all the technology and the business know-how, and they won't be protected by a powerful government. They'll be at the mercy of the countries in which their plant and equipment is located. It'll be up to those countries. They'll decide what to do. And if the business interests there say we've had enough of these people, we don't want them as competitors, they'll simply be confiscated the way we do people.
So this is against the interests of the big multinational corporations?
Oh, yeah, sure. But so is jobs offshoring, but it doesn't stop them. You see, look, they don't realize it's against their interests because the CEOs are short-term. You don't have a CEO that comes in the office when he's 30 years old and stays till he's 65 and is thinking about decade after decade. You got a guy who comes in and he's 60, he's going to be out and he's 65. He might not get in until he's 62. He's going to be out in 3 years. What's he going to do? He's maximizing his short-run profits because he's only got a short-run time. And how do they do that? We do that by destroying our own consumer market. We fire all our workers so they don't have any income, and we hire Chinese, and the labor costs go down, the profits go up, and my bonuses mushroom. Well, he's better off, and the shareholders are better off. But what happens down the road is, what happened to the buying power of the American people? They were working here in this manufacturing plant making $25 an hour. Now they're unemployed, or they're hospital orderlies at $7.25 an hour, or fast food workers, or they're stocking shelves at Walmart or Home Depot, or they're waitresses and bartenders.
So let me just jump in again. So I started off the second part of the conversation talking about psychopaths, and we've gone in different directions with this, and it's kind of shocking to me that even the biggest corporations are going to be hurt by the actions of the United States here. Do you think that psychopaths have a role in this in terms of being in government or in corporations?
No, it's what I said. The corporations are basically hurt by their own actions because they have a short-term time horizon. There are very few exceptions to this. One, I think, is Monsanto. I think Monsanto has long-term, which is we're going to take over the seed production in the world. There's not going to be any other seeds but ours. See, right now, and they use their power with the U.S. government to force other countries to accept the GMO seeds. Right now, El Salvador is getting a $300 million loan. And at Monsanto's urging, Washington is telling El Salvador government, okay, you're going to get this loan, but you know what you really got to do if you really want to get it, you've got to stop relying on all the seeds that are native that your farmers have and buy instead from Monsanto. So Monsanto is an exception to the rule that I laid down, but the manufacturing companies and the high-tech knowledge skill companies, software engineering, that type of thing, they're all destroying their future American consumer market because they're laying off their workers and hiring Chinese and other people. And so in the short run, they do well because the profits go up, the bonuses go up, the shareholders are happy because they've got capital gains. But after a decade or two of this, you've destroyed the income of American consumers, and they can't buy. And that's what we're seeing now. We see all these reports, Rob, you can read them. No growth in American median family income for several decades. And so they made up the lack of income growth by going deeper into debt. But now they're so deep in debt they can't take any more debt. So there's no way to expand American consumer spending, and that's why there's no real recovery. That's why the economy can't get off its butt. It can't get on its feet because there's no income growth to drive it.
Okay, so I want to transition to another topic now, and that's economics, capitalism, wealth inequality. These are big issues that don't have simple answers, but and also globalization. I want to throw that in too. We've got major problems there, and it seems to me, and a growing number of people, that the answer is not capitalism as we've known it. What are you thinking about that?
Well, we've known different kinds of capitalism. The kind we've had since Clinton allowed the repeal of Glass-Steagall which separated commercial from investment banks. And since Clinton allowed a handful of firms to concentrate the entire American media, that kind of capitalism is very different from other kinds of capitalism, because we now have an unregulated capitalism in which there are no rules and in which fraud is widespread, manipulation, rigging of markets, and the whole thing now works for a handful of people. The 1%, the 99%. And this has practically nothing to do with taxation. It really wouldn't matter what the tax rates were, the same thing would be happening. Because when you don't regulate human behavior, then everybody in the market can behave like a sociopath and a psychopath. And so we have a situation where 85% of all stock trades today are computers trying to front-run trades that have been placed. So each firm tries to get a faster computer. It tries to get closer to in its physical location to the point of entry of the information. We now have the scandal which has appeared of the stock exchanges themselves selling preferential locations so fast computers can pick up a trade that's about to happen and get in front of the trade before it happens. Well, this is a rigged system. This is like, the rigged casino and the gambling joint. The whole system now is rigged. The Fed rigs the bond market by buying huge numbers of bonds. That's why the bond prices are high and the interest rates are low. The money the Fed pours into the banks, buying the bonds, gets into the stock market. They speculate on stock market, on S&P futures, stock market futures. Every time the stock market starts to go down, the plunge protection team buys the futures. Up it goes. Every time gold starts to go up because people are worried about the dollar, the Fed steps in and shorts the gold market. So you don't have any markets. You don't have capitalism when banks are too big to fail. Under capitalism, nobody's too big to fail. The whole virtue of capitalism, to the extent it has any, is that those companies that make inefficient use of resources go out of business. But they don't go out of business when the government steps in and uses the taxpayer money to subsidize their losses. Well, that's the way we've been treating the banks now for 6 years. We've done this for other companies. So this is like a gangster state capitalism. Now, all capitalism, like all human arrangements, has problems and disadvantages. And the purpose of regulation is to make the system work for more people rather than for few people. So when you take the regulation out of the system, which is what the liberals and the conservatives and the Republicans and Democrats have done together, then the system doesn't work for anybody but the handful that's got the power and that are rigging it. So what could you do? Well, you really need to desperately put back in the regulation. The system failed once before, and that's why we had all of this regulation added. It was a response to the 30s, which were a result of the 20s. So when you go in and say, well, let's take out everything that's worked all these years, take them out, and give carte blanche to greed and corruption and theft and mendacity and all the rest, and then you get failure. So
now what you're talking about, putting in regulations, that is anathema to Milton Friedman, Chicago
No, it's not.
economics,
No.
and libertarians.
Well, it might be to some libertarians, certainly not to Milton Friedman or Chicago. The critique that Chicago made of regulation is associated with George Stigler, and he said the real problem with regulation is that the regulatory body ends up being captured by the industry it's supposed to regulate. And we've seen that in all this recent revelations. You may have seen about a month ago, one of the lead prosecutors of the Securities and Exchange Commission at his retirement dinner, he gave a speech that stunned everyone. He said the SEC high-ups blocked all of my prosecutions of the banks because they were protecting the banks in exchange for big million-dollar jobs when they left government service. So that's the argument that Chicago made, not that they shouldn't have regulation. They just said, look, it can work for a while, but sooner or later the regulators are going to be hand in glove with who they're regulating because they'll be bought off. You protect them while you're in office, and then look at the big job you get when you leave. Well, look at the big job the senator got who spearheaded the repeal of Glass-Steagall for the banks. As soon as it was done, he was made vice chairman of one of the largest of the banks, paid multi-million-dollar income, and his only duties was to go around giving speeches.
Who's this?
Phil Gramm.
Phil Gramm, yeah.
So it's the way it works. When the morality of the culture breaks down, everybody is for sale, even the guardians who are supposed to protect the public. See, this is the problem with the liberal and the progressive view. They don't understand that it all comes back to what is the moral fiber of the population.
What is the what? I couldn't hear that.
The moral fiber. If it's been eroded, corroded, if money is the most important thing, if you have to have money to have a good opinion of yourself, to be valued by others, to be looked up to, then everything ends up for sale, and that's the trouble. And so I say the answer is to go back to regulation, but there's still some regulation, and as that SEC prosecutor said, he simply couldn't bring indictments of the banks because the higher-ups wouldn't permit it because they were protecting the banks so they got good jobs when they left. And when you look at how the government is run, I mean, who are the secretaries of the Treasury? They come out of Wall Street, mainly out of Goldman Sachs. Who runs the financial regulatory agencies? Former Goldman Sachs executives. Who runs all the European organizations? Former Goldman Sachs executives. Don't you remember when the EU stepped into Greece and Italy and said, we're having to take over your government because you can't pay your bills, and if you want loans to get these bills paid, you'll have to let us decide who's in the government. They appointed a Goldman Sachs guy to run Greece. They appointed another one to run Italy. So when you have the whole system run by the people who are abusing it and looting it, regulation is non-existent. You could have every regulation you could think of on the books. It just wouldn't be of any use because the prosecutors would be blocked by the higher-ups from bringing the cases.
It's I got to say, when I have these conversations with you, they're usually pretty bleak. what you've given here is a pretty bleak assessment.
No, I'm not giving a bleak assessment. I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you what the real situation is. So it is not the case, like so many liberals and progressives think, that we would have plenty of regulation if it weren't for Milton Friedman and the libertarians. It wasn't Milton Friedman and the libertarians who overturned Glass-Steagall.
Yeah. It was
Republicans and Democrats acting as agents for the banks. It wasn't done on by an economics department or
well, and that's the kind of history that makes me believe that at this time in the world and in history, legislation is not going to change things. Elections are not going to change things.
Well, the elections could, like I said earlier, if you actually get third parties and they get these votes. You know, like it's just happened in the European Union elections. This was a shock. And it's just happened when the Tea Party guy, the university professor, unknown, just unseated Eric Cantor. Now, it can happen. But the question remains, what happens to this guy? Well, you can bet your bottom dollar the Israel lobby's already gone to work on him. And you can bet your bottom dollar the plans are in place already to slander and destroy the reputations of the crop of people who won the EU elections. If they can survive that, or if the people see through it, then you could actually have some kind of change. On the other hand, if these people are coming into office just because they want power too, then they'll be bought off too. So third parties can be bought off just like the first two parties. So you really, it's like I said, Rob, it comes back to what's the moral fiber of the people, of the culture, and how much will they put up with? And if they'll put up with anything, which is what the American people, by and large, seem willing to do, then you can't get change.
All right, I'm going to move on. I got two more issues I want to talk about.
You know, this is going to be a very long program. We've been on for
I'm going to break it into more than one. Okay. So another issue that's come up since we spoke last is Ed Snowden and the disclosures about NSA and our surveillance state. What's your take on Ed Snowden and NSA and how it's affecting Americans and the world?
Well, Snowden didn't tell us anything that we didn't already know. William Binney had already told us everything. And William Binney is the one who designed the spy system for NSA. He designed it, put it into operation. And then when he saw how they were using it, which was illegally, unconstitutionally, for bribery, for blackmail, for corporate business interests, and that very, very little of this spy system was directed at foreign threats, but it's directed at every American's email, credit card purchase, internet site visited, blah, blah, blah. He said, wow, why did I make this thing for them? And he went public and said they're spying on everybody. Everybody. Their allies, the Congress, the judges, their own federal agencies, even the CIA director. Remember, that's how they got Petraeus out. They found out he had an extramarital affair, and they used that to get him out. So he told everybody, well, the only difference between him and Snowden is he didn't take any documents to prove it. He thought that his word would suffice because he was a high official and he had designed the system and knew everything about it. And the government said, oh, he's just some sort of disgruntled guy. He didn't get promoted, and he has mental problems. So nobody paid attention. So Snowden saw all this and said, well, I'm a nobody compared to him. If I simply just tell them, they don't do any good. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take all the documents that prove it. Well, they tried to prosecute Benny, but they found out they couldn't because they couldn't say he had stolen anything. He hadn't taken a single document. Well, Snowden apparently took 1 million of them or so. And so how they're trying to counteract Snowden is to say, oh, he's a spy, he's a thief, he stole. You can't believe him. You can't believe a spy and a thief. He works for the Chinese. He works for the Russians. And a lot of people, particularly journalists, are very jealous of all the attention Snowden and Greenwald have gotten. They can't stand it. They're green with envy. In fact, the envy has turned to hatred. They hate Greenwald and they hate Snowden. Look at all the attention they got. And then the Pulitzer Prize.
Wait, who hates Greenwald and Snowden?
Oh, all of them. Michael Kinsley wants them prosecuted, arrested. It's endless. You just look. All you got to do is read, Rob. They're always denouncing Greenwald and Snowden and Julian Assange. You know, Julian Assange. Now every time some journalist mentions him, it's always the sex offender or something. You know, there's never been any sex charge brought against him. The initial ones that were brought were dismissed by the Swedish prosecutor. They said, this is bullshit. There's no case. This was consensual on the part of the women. They admitted themselves. So, but they always, but Washington got another prosecutor, not to bring charges. There are no charges outstanding against Julian Assange, none. What this prosecutor did was something unique. They said, we want him extradited for questioning. Nobody's ever been extradited for questioning. And he said, okay, I'll come here. I'm right here in the embassy, and you can come, and I'll let you question me. And everybody knows that the prosecutor is going to, if she can grab him, she's going to turn him over to the Americans, and they're going to waterboard him until he confesses he's a spy. And the support for this among other journalists is very high. They don't like Assange. They don't like Greenwald. Greenwald's always having to defend himself. And Snowden, and when Snowden was on that TV thing the other day, the most important part of the discussion was cut out. I think you can go online and find it. But they always set these guys up as much as they can. So, you know, it's just jealousy. It's professional jealousy. It's, oh, he's getting so much attention. Why doesn't somebody pay attention to me? That's the way it works. It's the same
well, you know, just to get back to what you said about Benny, I met Bill Binney, had dinner with him, had him on my radio show. He's a heroic guy. He really is. He's basically said that he's dedicating the rest of his life to exposing the NSA for what they're doing and trying to right the wrongs. But he also said that if Snowden had tried to reveal what was going on within the United States, he would have been arrested. He couldn't do what Benny did.
That's right, because Benny didn't take any documents. And Snowden took the documents in order to prove that this was happening. See, nobody would believe Benny. They said, where's the proof? Where's the evidence?
Yeah.
And he did. He said, well, I'm telling you. And so Snowden had seen all this. So when he saw the same thing happening, he said, well, they'll never believe anybody. You've got to have the documents.
And beyond that, they lied. I mean, Clapper went to Congress and lied, blatantly lied about what they were doing.
Yes, of course, but they lie about everything. What has the United States government told the truth? Can you tell me one thing they've told the truth about that you remember in your lifetime? Did they tell the truth about weapons of mass destruction, Al-Qaeda connections? Did they tell the truth about Gaddafi, about Assad using gas against his own people, about Iranian nukes? Have they told the truth about Ukraine? What have they told the truth about? Do they tell the truth about the unemployment rate, the inflation rate, the GDP growth rate? No. You know, every month I expose the lies again and again and again. They don't tell the truth about anything, Rob. Nothing.
Yeah.
Just try to think of. I sat down the other day and spent 3 hours. I couldn't think of one damn thing the government has said that I can remember that was the truth.
Yeah.
They do what they want. They have an agenda. It's this neoconservative-driven overall agenda of American hegemony, and under that comes build the police power, build the unaccountable power, do what I want. I'm not accountable. I've got power. What's Congress? They're nothing. We can lie to them whenever we want. What will they do about it? Nothing. He's still in office. Why wasn't he impeached? They wanted to impeach Bill Clinton for lying about a sexual affair with a White House intern. Well, you can't blame him for lying. Why would he want to stand up in front of his wife and daughter and say, yes, I've been screwing around with this girl in the Oval Office? Nobody would want to do that. What does it matter? But here's a guy that's spying on the Congress, blackmailing them, and he lies about it, and they don't do anything about it.
Well, wait. You're saying that Obama is spying on the Congress and blackmailing them.
Oh yeah, sure, that's right. Look, that was the original reason for the spying, was to shut everybody up. If you've got a program like Bush had that's going to go to war without cause, without congressional authorization, if you're going to do all kinds of things on the basis of lies, do you want to be challenged? No. You want to be brought down, impeached? I mean, Bush is a perfect example of somebody who should have been impeached a dozen times. Why didn't it happen? Nobody dared. Remember when somebody said we got to impeach him, and what Nancy Pelosi said? It's off the table, it's off the table. She was scared to death. She was the House leader.
You know, it's interesting.
They got something on her. She knew immediately to kill this before it could go anywhere.
Back then, you had John Conyers, the head of the Judiciary Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, and I happened to have an opportunity. I was down in Congress, and I had a conversation with him that happened to be taped. It was 3 or 4 minutes long, and I challenged him, and he absolutely denied that it was Nancy Pelosi keeping it off the table.
Well, she said it publicly.
No, I know.
So what good does it do for him? Look, don't you remember people thought Conyers was going to do something about something. I forget what it was now. But they were all enthusiastic, and they thought he started out like he was going to do something about something, and very quickly changed his mind, backed off, and sold out everybody who was relying on him. I forget what that particular incident was, or issue was. I mean, we could probably research it on the internet and find it, but there was a whole bunch of people trying to do right and get justice, and they were relying on Conyers, and he was going to do it, and he was enthusiastic, and then all of a sudden it just stopped. So I think when it first happened, I wrote, this was years ago, I said the whole reason for the spying is to blackmail Congress and foreign leaders. If you can blackmail them, then they can't oppose your policies. So it's a power thing. It's a power thing, and that's what it's used for. And they use it against themselves, like Petraeus. He pissed somebody off about something, so they got him out. And that's what it's all about. It's not. And, of course, the media they can't do anything. I mean, blackmailed or not, it's owned by 5 big companies, and they don't represent journalism. They represent government interest and the corporate interest. And so the editors and the reporters know there's all kinds of things they can't possibly touch or say anything about. And now we have the case with the recent Supreme Court ruling that this New York Times reporter has no protection under the First Amendment. He's got to go tell the government who leaked him the secret of the government's wrongdoing that he wrote about in a chapter of his book.
That's James Risen.
Yeah,
I believe.
So if Risen reports a government crime that's leaked to him, nothing happens to the government for committing a crime, but Risen has got to rat on the whistleblower so the whistleblower can be arrested and imprisoned for ratting on the government's crime. And if Risen doesn't, then he risks being arrested and imprisoned. So what kind of journalism can exist in that environment? None. And once they shut down the New York Times, they'll turn on the internet, and they'll shut you down and me down. So we can't simply assume they're going to let us talk and say the things we do and run the sites we run if they don't let Risen report what a whistleblower tells him about government misbehavior. So the power is there, and it will be used, no doubt.
So do you think that Snowden's bringing all this to light will have any positive effect?
It depends. The president of Brazil said, why are we in this American communication system? All it does, it lets them abuse us, spy on us. Why don't we have our own? The Russians and the Chinese have said the same thing. What are we doing? Why do we use the American internet-based system? This is stupid. Why are we doing this? We weren't thinking. We must be absolute total idiots. And they are. They are. They're completely stupid to be using the American internet system because it lets them be spied on. So the question is, will they do anything about it? Or is it too much trouble? Is it too expensive? Or is it just too convenient to use what's there? Will Brazil try to do something but find that American financial power is in the way? And they really can't get it off the ground because the backers and the people financing it are intimidated or controlled by Wall Street or the big banks or the IMF. So you don't know whether anything can be done about it. We have all of these cases of all the big internet companies letting the government breach the system so they can spy on people. We have these laws now which they can't hardly do anything about it. I just don't. We've got Merkel. She was all mad. They spied, even had her private cell phone. They were spying on her, recording her personal conversations, and she was all mad and going to do something, and then we have all the statements from the German ministers, oh, well, we don't want to get on the wrong side of our good ally. So I think on the whole that Washington's power over these people is pretty firm, and that they either can't get out from under it because of the blackmail, or they haven't the energy to take on a fight like that. To get in a fight in the United States takes a lot of energy. And if you're trying to be elected in Germany and then your opponent can say, well, look, she can't get along with America, our great friend and ally. What will we do without America? Blah, blah, blah. Then that can be used against Merkel. and she can be defeated or lose her position in the party. So there's so many constraints on people's ability to do anything. And right now, you and I, we have an easy go because they haven't focused on the internet yet. But they'll get to it. And so...
Well, that's what they're doing. That's what the Obama's Republican FCC corporate guy is doing, basically ending net neutrality.
That's part of it, yeah. That's part of it. That's one way to be able to shut down sites that don't pay a lot of money. Those sites become so slow and so hard to open, and you wait so long. And, you know, can you pay the kind of money that Amazon.com can pay? No. So Op-Ed News is online, but you visit it and you click on something, and in 5 minutes it opens. And that's what they're going to do. Yeah. But it doesn't mean they won't also come and arrest you if somebody reports something to you that they don't like that you published. So they'll get you both ways, and me too. They'll get me both ways. So when the Supreme Court refuses to hear a First Amendment case involving the legal intimidation of journalists, you know freedom of speech is dead in the United States. Stone dead.
Yeah. It's pretty scary.
It's scary, and what makes it even more scary is all these people who still believe in the government.
Well,
if we just had the right person. Yeah, right. Like Obama.
Well, what's the alternative?
To what?
To government.
Well, this was the problem that the Founding Fathers addressed, isn't it, Rob? They said any government is deadly. The most danger any people ever face is from their own government. We know this. It's a fact, they said. What can we do? On the other hand, what's the alternative to government? So what you do is you tie it down with the Constitution, and you separate it into equal branches and rely on the jealousy of each branch to control the other. And then you do the same thing to the population. You have an electoral system that's dispersed, that's weighted differently. The property has a big weight, so it's harder to steal people's property, and so on. Well, that's what they set up. Well, once it's set up, we began progressively dismantling it, taking it apart. And everything that the Founding Fathers put in has been taken out. So, and they said, and Jefferson said that's what will happen. And that's why every 200 years you have to kill everybody in the government and start all over. He said this is exactly what will happen. Everything that we've done to make this safe, make government safe for the people, will be dismantled over the next 200 years. And what do you do then? You kill them and you start all over. And that's what Thomas Jefferson said. Not in so many words, but that's what he said. And you know, it's a famous statement. So
yeah, about the tree of what is it? The tree of democracy is
tree of liberty is watered with the blood of tyrants, or something like that.
Right.
So, and now let me just be sure that everybody understands, including the NSA, who's listening to every word, and the FBI. I'm not advocating that everybody in Washington be killed. It's not. I'm just simply reporting historically what Founding Fathers thought. So I am not advocating it. I'm simply saying this is what they thought. And you know, you can go read it in the history books yourself. So
okay. So that takes me to another thing I wanted to talk about, and that's what we've been seeing lately is right-wing terrorists in America, people getting guns and shooting people, like the couple in Las Vegas who wrapped themselves in a "Don't Tread on Me" flag after they committed suicide after killing a couple people. Where does this fit into all of this?
You know, Rob, I don't know. I don't pay any attention to these things because I'm focused on major economic things or Russia and the Ukraine, you know, major world events. I don't have the time to go do this, but all I can say is, sorry? All I can say is this. I have read and spoken to people in the past. You know, I was in Washington for 25 years, very much involved. There are, or allegedly are, government programs. They're off the books, and they're about manipulating people. And they're about using manipulated people to build support for a policy or change that otherwise has no support that they can't get anywhere with. And so if you got people doing crazy things that don't really make much sense, and they involve guns, then you can see this as an attack on the Second Amendment. They want to disarm people. Very difficult to do. And so you build a case. So that's one possible explanation. I don't know that it is the explanation, but that's one possible explanation.
Okay. I'll leave that alone because you said you're not really paying that much attention to that. In a recent article, you talked about Monsanto and GMO products, and you really blew my mind when you reported that in Russia they're treating the use of GMO seeds as a terrorist act, and I love that actually. I think that that's kind of where it ought to be. You plant GMO seeds, and the farmer next to you doesn't have them, and those seeds go and pollinate. And they get pollinated into the other farm, and all of a sudden, that farmer has a problem. What are your thoughts about Monsanto and GMO?
Well, I think enough independent scientists have established that in the least, not enough is known about all the consequences and side effects and long-term effects of GMOs, and that the information that the federal government is going on is the industry's own information. The federal government has no independent studies of Monsanto. And there was a letter that I reported a year or two ago when I wrote about it from one of the most prominent microbiologists in the department at Purdue University who wrote the Secretary of Agriculture and pointed out that it was impossible for independent scientists to study the consequences of GMOs because they couldn't get any funding, and that all the studies were funded by the agribusiness companies themselves. And he pointed out that the studies that had been done, and he cited a number of them, all showed extraordinary harmful benefits, harmful results of the GMOs, that it depletes the nutrition in the soil, it destroys the natural balance in organisms in the soil such that new plant diseases arise that formerly were suppressed by the barriers within the natural situation in the soil, pre-glyphosate, pre-Roundup, that the livestock fed GMO foods had premature aging and infertility problems, that infertility problems were now showing up in humans who have GMO diets and meats fed on GMO diets, that all kinds of super weeds, super bugs are evolving as a way of resisting the Roundup that they spray. You know, one of the main reasons for these GMOs is that you can spray the crops with herbicides, so you don't have to plow between the rows to keep the weeds down, and the crops are immune to the herbicides. But what they're finding is the weeds are developing immunity, so they have to use heavier and heavier and heavier doses. So all of this glyphosate, which is a dangerous poison, is polluting the soil, and the runoff now is polluting the waters, the surface streams, the groundwaters, the rainwater. And he went on and on and said this is really a bad situation to be continuing without any independent studies. And the Agriculture Department did absolutely nothing. So it's the power of Monsanto.
Well, let's talk about that. Monsanto. You mentioned Monsanto earlier in terms of how it's different than a lot of the other corporations, and
it's thinking long-term monopoly. Yep.
Now, there's also been some people saying that what Monsanto's doing with its herbicides has an effect on the bees.
Right, that's right. There's no doubt. So that then destroys the pollinating agent. I mean, the whole thing is, and yet the United States pressures every country to accept these seeds. You know, they had a knockdown, drag-out fight in France about it. And let me tell you this will be interesting to you and your readers. The main reason for this transatlantic partnership, you know, and the trans-Pacific partnership, you know, these so-called trade agreements, what these things do is it gives American corporations immunity to European and Asian law. And it establishes that if France bans GMOs, Monsanto can bring a lawsuit. And France has violated the agreement by restraining trade. And so all these partnerships, they serve these corporate interests, and you can bet Monsanto is at the bottom of it because it basically makes it impossible for any country to ban a GMO. That's the whole purpose of it. It's got nothing to do with trade. It has to do with anything that the American corporations sell or want to do. No government can get in the way, regardless of what the government's laws are, because that is a violation of the agreement. So if France says or Russia says no GMOs, they're in violation of the agreement and can be sued.
How about you personally? Do you eat GMO foods? How scrupulous are you? Careful are you in avoiding them?
I'm as careful as I can be, but see, there's no labeling. Every time somebody passes labeling, Monsanto gets it overturned or blocked. So there's no labeling. So the only thing you can do is to do organic and hope. So, but the organic, you don't really know if it's GMO or not. All you know is they didn't use hormones or or antibiotics, or if it's meat, or if it's grown a vegetable, they didn't use pesticides. So that kind of, you don't know though if they used herbicides. So it's hard to know. You can, and even if you go to little farms and farmers markets and things, it's the corn. I think most of the corn in the United States is now GMO. So
yeah, I went to a Chinese buffet last night, and there was corn on the cob, and I usually love corn on the cob, but since I've started avoiding GMO, I took it. It was like reflexes. I took a bite, and then I thought, it's got to be GMO. It's corn.
Yeah. Right, and the only thing no, you're right. That's the whole.
And it's worse than that because recently I've looked at fish farming, and they put corn into the feed that the fish get. They put it into the meat that you eat, so that it's not only going into the meat, but it's going into all the dairy products and the cheese. And then you've got corn syrup, which is in just about everything you drink, and all kinds of things that are sweetened. I mean,
right.
It's almost everywhere.
Even in pet foods. Even your dog and your cat is getting it.
Yep. And the way I try to sell to people that they shouldn't eat GMO is they make the GMO plants so that they can tolerate herbicides and pesticides. And then they can spray the plants like crazy with herbicides and they won't die, but then that's what's on the plants.
Yeah, and that's right, but it's worse than that. As the plant lives and feeds itself and grows the edible parts, that is coming out of soil that's now polluted, disrupted, lost all of its natural components, and the consequences of that, it's going into the food product itself in ways that are not well known and understood, but which are showing up in high rates of abortions of animals, reproductive problems, and premature aging. And these are not problems that have ever been experienced before, but they're now associated with animals fed on GMO diets. So last winter here we have, I'm up in the mountains in a wildlife sanctuary, and there were no acorns last year, none, because of the way the climate did. The deer were starving, the turkeys were starving. And I said, I can't stand this. I've got to feed these animals. It's illegal for me to do that. Not illegal, but I mean you get chewed out. It's not illegal. And I got all this corn and was feeding the deer, and then it dawned on me, I'm feeding them GMOs. I got to stop this. I can't do this. So then you think about hay, and now Monsanto's introducing GMOs into alfalfa, so even the hay. So this is why the company's called Monsanto. Monsanto, that's what it's called, Monsanto. Monsatan. And it's relentless. It's absolutely relentless. And
yeah, I think it's probably the most hated company in the world. And I must say, I am very proud to have been personally attacked by their public relations director a number of years ago for what Op-Ed News did to make public what Monsanto was doing.
Well, congratulations to you.
Yeah.
But you see, the American people are so pitiful they can't even get labeling passed. So, if the American people are so weak and so pitiful that they can't get labeling on GMOs, now you can get labeling on everything's labeled. It shows you if it's what chemicals it's got, what artificial flavors, if it's got fructose, corn syrup, but you cannot have it say it's GMO. So if people can't get products that are GMO labeled, how are they going to deal with any big issue, such as the economy, the foreign policy, the wars, the police state? One company can block the entire American population from getting labeling. Then how is that population going up against Wall Street, the military security complex?
Yep.
It's not.
It's just, we got a problem. How about Europe? I mean, Europe has been able to hold off GMOs and Monsanto. How have they been able to do it? I mean, again, Europe shows us that there is a way.
It's not
there
a
is
European
hope.
company. And so it's harder for it to influence the European governments, though it has. There are some cases where they've had success. And Europe probably has more independent funding for scientists. See, in the United States, independent funding for scientists has about disappeared. They're either funded by the military security complex or by agribusiness or by the oil industry. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So that they're not scientists out there who are funded for the sake of the truth or pure research. There are very few of that is possible in the United States anymore. The corporate interest funded. So it produces their results. Otherwise, the scientist doesn't have a career. So in Europe, it's not like that. It's starting. It's starting because the corporations learn from us. Hey, look, we can get more power. Let's finance this, or let's do that. And it's starting there. But plus, the Europeans, it's important to them. You know, French food makes American food look awful. So does Italian. So does Belgium. These countries are proud of their food cultures. And they're renowned. I mean, and they each have their own kinds of culinary techniques and specialties, and so ingredients are very important to them. And if you've ever
we have fast food.
Huh?
And
what?
We have fast food.
You have fast food, yeah. If you have ever lived for any length of time in France, and you have experienced shopping and the ingredients and the taste that comes from things, and you compare it to what you can get here, there's no comparison. The American ingredients are bland or tasteless compared to what you get in France. And so, but the inroads are being made, you know, in more and more supermarkets. I mean, when I was a student at Oxford, England didn't have supermarkets. There wasn't any such thing. You went to the butcher shop, you went to the bakery, you went to the greengrocers. And so shopping was a whole bunch of little shops that you did to get your groceries. And the ingredients were good, and things were good. And but now England is overrun with supermarkets. They're probably starting up in France. It may be there. I don't know. It's been a long time since I spent much time in those countries. But so that's probably the reason. They know more. They've got better research. They've got more independent scientists, and they are proud of the food and how it tastes. And it's important to them. It doesn't seem to be important to Americans who are happy to go to fast food or chain restaurants where everything is prepackaged and they stick it in the oven or the microwave. And a lot of restaurants actually don't even need chefs because they're not cooking anything.
Yeah, I recently went to the restaurant show, the biggest one in the country in Chicago, and they have all these prepared packages they can just throw in and do. I mean, they don't.
Right.
It's you don't want to go there.
Right. And so that's a big difference with much of the rest of the world. The rest of the world didn't like that. And but of course, the United States is trying to make the rest of the world like that. And Monsanto.
Yeah, they do the same thing. They do the same thing. The FDA does the same thing. Years ago, about 21 years ago, I went to Russia for a couple of weeks, and I met at the time with the head of the Russian Academy of Medical Sciences, which is like the equivalent to the head of the NIH, and got to meet with a number of heads of different institutions there. And when I came back, I don't know how, but I got a call from the FDA saying, "Can you help us to get Russia to adopt our standards for drug regulation and control?" Which just scared the hell out of me.
Yeah. Well, the spying's been going on longer than we know.
Yeah, but it's really a kind of an evangelization by federal government agencies for corporations. Because they're serving
right.
corporations when they do that.
Yeah, the FDA serves the corporations, not the public. It serves the corporations. It's like Stiegler said. So the question is whether we could ever again have an effective regulatory mechanism.
Well,
Rob, we've been on for 2 hours. I got a lot else I got to go do. So I enjoyed this conversation.
Right. Thank you so much.
Speaking to you is always a pleasure.
Yeah,
it's always
same
a pleasure
here.
to speak to you. And I appreciate your sight and and your honesty and the things you try to do. And I know you will continue.
All right. Thank you so much. And keep up your great work, too. We really need you.
Okay, Rob. Thank you, my friend. Goodbye.